What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, it's Monday, you know what time it is. It's time to go over the top waiver ads heading into week 11. I will say, similar to last week, the waiver wire, it's really not that poppin'. It is a small upgrade over the options we had last week, but nobody I would really invest heavy capital into when it comes to fab, waste a high priority on, unless your team is decimated with injuries, in which case maybe I would consider investing in one of these players. If you want to know the exact fab or waiver priority we would spend on each one of these specific players, the best way to get that information is to go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Members of our website not only gain access to all of that waiver information, you'll get our weekly rankings that will help you with your start and sit decisions, access to the trade model, sports betting picks, DFS picks, and more. So if that interests you, once again, that's at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With that being said, though, let's hop over to the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which running back currently ranks last in rushing yards over expectation. The correct answer was actually Todd Gurley. Congratulations to Loco. You got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, since this week has not yet finished, this will be through 9 weeks, but which wide receiver through 9 weeks with at least 40 targets currently leads the league in yards after catch per reception? Once again, that's through 9 weeks. Which wide receiver with 40 or more targets leads the league in yards after catch per reception? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Without further ado, though, let's hop right into the running backs. And the first running back is going to be a player that fell under the radar for me mostly. That is Wayne Gallman of the New York Giants. Currently, he's owned in about 28% of leagues, which really doesn't add up to the production we've seen on the field. As we know, Devonta Freeman was brought in to be the leading rusher out of this backfield. While he was the leading rusher, he performed very poorly, especially in the area of rushing yards over expectation. Wayne Gallman performing much better, and Gallman quietly has scored for 4 consecutive weeks, had a single week high of 5 receptions, so we know he's being used in the receiving game. Would we like to see that receiving game production increase? Definitely, but at least we know he is due for some targets, and he's now coming off a game in week 10 against the Philadelphia Eagles in which he scored twice. Now, like I said, he is owned in 28% of leagues, but the New York Giants are heading into a bye week. I could definitely see this as a player to be dropped. The only real fear you should have in picking him up and potentially putting him in your lineup as early as week 12, that would definitely fall on the health of Devonta Freeman. Currently, Freeman's still on the IR, but if he comes back, while Gallman should still be the lead back for some time as he works his way back into health and into the offense, there is a chance that come the fantasy playoffs, Wayne Gallman is no longer the starter. The next running back we have, this is one of those PSA running backs that should be owned in all leagues, J.D. McKissic of the Washington football team. The reason I say that, McKissic is currently owned in 60% of leagues, but at this point, he should be owned in all leagues. He's been on the waiver list for 3 to 4 consecutive weeks now. He had 9 receptions 2 weeks ago. Now he had 7 receptions this past week, even found his way into the end zone, and his role and responsibility in this offense, it doesn't appear to be changing. While we can't expect him to reach pay dirt each and every week, those types of games should be more few and far between. Games in which he has 5, 6 plus receptions, it appears as though those are going to be more frequent than games where he has less than that. In PPR leagues, half PPR leagues, that is extremely valuable. You don't need me to tell you that. So a player that's only owned in 60% of leagues putting up this type of production, he really needs to start getting the credit he deserves. The next player we have, forgive me if I butcher his name, it's Salvon Ahmed of the Miami Dolphins. The reason he doesn't rank higher, and I'm sure he ranks much higher on a lot of other waiver lists that are out there, it's because I honestly just don't trust where Miami's head's at with giving the lead back carries to one player or another. Yes, Ahmed, he did get the touches this week. I'm not not discrediting the amount of touches either. We're talking 21 rushes out of the backfield, 1 reception for 5 yards. He has been efficient on the carries he's received, but even though he scored a touchdown, I would not be shocked whatsoever if they start to give touches to another running back next week. This player, though, we do have the benefit of having virtually no ownership across any leagues. So if you're in a desperate situation for a running back and you're starting players that are backups, I do believe strongly, at least in the short term, that this player is going to be getting a somewhat sizable market share of the touches out of this backfield, and that can be really valuable for some teams that are out there. Like I said, he's owned in sub 1% of leagues, so if you're one of those people that fall into that category, look for him on your waiver wire. The next running back, guys, pretty simple here. It's Kalen Ballage. Pretty surprised that Kalen Ballage is still only owned in about 25% of leagues. Yes, Austin Eckler is coming back, but at this point, Kalen Ballage is a lead back out there producing. In this past week against Miami, he received not only 18 touches on the ground, posting 68 rushing yards, but he also had a whopping 5 receptions, and while no, he didn't score, he did eclipse over 100 total yards this past week. If you couple that in with his receiving floor that he's proven to have over the past few weeks, this can be a player that's pretty reliable, one that you can certainly put in the flex, but understand it is somewhat of a short-term rental because we do have the health of the other players in this backfield presumably increasing, and the overall opportunities for Kalen Ballage will likely decrease as the health of those players starts to rise. The next player is also more of a PSA because he is owned in a high percent of leagues. We're talking 41% here, but it's Nyheim Hines of the Indianapolis Colts. Admittedly, this backfield, it's a mess, guessing week over week which player is going to receive what amount of targets in what aspect of their game, whether it be receiving or on the ground. It's a real head scratcher, I'll admit that. But what we do know is that Nyheim Hines, any given week, has an extremely high ceiling. He is involved in this offense. Starting him in your flex, while yes, it will be risky week to week, it's proven to have paid off for many people out there. In the statement I've said throughout this video, this is a player who should be owned in all leagues. So if you're one of those people out there that see Nyheim Hines on your waiver wire, even though you're seeing inconsistent production from him, inconsistent production is more production than we typically get off the waiver wire, so try to scoop him up, put him on your bench, and if you're in a situation where you may be desperate that week, put him in and hope for the best. The final running back we have on the running back waiver list this week is going to be Cam Akers, and this is definitely a player who, if you want to skip him altogether, I could understand that, and the reason I added him is because the Rams, they fully employed a running back by committee approach. When looking out there for running backs that are actually available on the waivers, Cam Akers, he is the most widely available LA Rams running back, so if there is an injury to either Henderson or Malcolm Brown, Cam Akers' opportunity share should skyrocket immediately. We do want to always get ahead of these injuries before they happen, not claiming an injury is destined for either of those two players, but it's the NFL. This season, we all have seen the injuries happen in the blink of an eye, and Cam Akers has actually been a player whose opportunity share has been increasing in each of the past 2 weeks. Let's move over to the wide receivers, and while there isn't a long list of names like there are for running back, I definitely think the highlight of this entire waiver list is in the wide receiver position. To start, we have Michael Pittman. Pittman, of course, is on the Colts. They played on Thursday, and Pittman received an incredible amount of volume. We're, of course, talking about 8 targets. He converted that into 7 receptions for 101 receiving yards. Pretty respectable yards per reception average, but he also got a carry on the ground that went for 21 yards. If this is an aspect of his game that they continue to focus on, that could increase his week-to-week floor. But since coming back from injury, with the exception of his first game back in which he received 1 total target, the past 2 weeks, 7 targets, 8 targets. It's looking as if this is what we can expect for volume going his direction. Phillip Rivers has also been coming into his own in this passing offense, so if we are able to get a piece of that, and presumably the best piece of that, off the waiver wire, that's extremely valuable. Now, he is only owned in 5% of leagues, so desperate teams with injuries to your wide receiver position can certainly benefit from picking up Pittman, but there are also other solid options on the waivers outside of him. One of the more shakier options, but still needs to be picked up this week, that's Marquez Valdes-Scantling of the Green Bay Packers, currently owned in just 10% of leagues. This was a player who, over the past 2 seasons, the whole fantasy community has been high on. From a talent perspective, he has the height, we know he has the athleticism. The hands, though, they were always questionable. He will still, game by game, make these devastating drops that just will have you screaming at your television, but then at the same time, he'll have these miraculous plays that make you wonder why you dropped him before, why he's on your bench, and why you didn't start him this week. Over the past 2 games, no, he hasn't received an incredible amount of volume, 10 total targets between both contests, but he's turned those 10 targets into 6 receptions, 200 plus receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. At this point, he's in that category of a high upside boom bust flex play, and with some teams starting players like Anthony Miller, an option like this, it may be one that you find some use in as early as next week. The next player we have, another solid option, that's Jalen Reagor, currently owned in 24% of leagues. As we know, he is returning from the IR recently, not super recently. His last game missed due to injury was about 4 weeks ago. Sprinkle a bye week in between then, but he does have 2 games in which he's posted very promising numbers, and from a volume perspective, the 10 targets we saw with Marquez Valdes-Scantling that resulted in such massive production. Well, Jalen Reagor, he's received 6 targets in his first game and 7 targets this past week. I still think there are some kinks that he's going to work out of his game. Of course, he is a rookie. Rookies, they do play inconsistently. This is his 4th ever NFL game as a pro. And while no, it's not going to be the best time for us to be putting in players who are continuing to develop, because of course we're preparing for the playoffs, trying to lock in our playoff position, or possibly starting these players in the playoffs. No, it's not the perfect time, but an upside player we can get off the waiver wire who's involved in his offense and presumably going to see an increased opportunity share, that has its value. Carson Wentz, he's had his ups and downs, but overall we know he can support fantasy relevant wide receivers. They're looking for players to step up and produce, and Jalen Reagor looks like he's in the prime position to do just that. The final wide receiver kind of snuck up on us. It's Josh Reynolds of the LA Rams. I did add him to last week's list, not as a player who was a bona fide lock by any means, but we did see a trend of his volume increasing week over week. That trend did continue. He has now gone from 8 targets 3 games ago to 9 targets 2 games ago, and then this past week against Seattle, now he's eclipsed double-digit targets, coming in with 10. If this trend would continue into next week, we can expect an 11-target game. Very unlikely though against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the volume, it does warrant an add, and this is also a player who has scored a receiving touchdown in 2 of the past 4 weeks. I never really feel comfortable starting players who are fighting to be 3rd, 4th on their depth chart when it comes to receiving target market share, but over the past 3 weeks, we cannot argue the 8, 9, and 10 targets he's been able to produce, and while no, the results have not been exactly fantastic from him, that amount of volume, it does warrant the ownership. Alright guys, we're moving over to the tight end position, and at this point I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we have to all add Dallas Goedert. No, the results on the field, they didn't match up with what we would have wanted with Dallas Goedert coming back, presumably at his healthiest since returning. This was also a game that was divisional, they needed to win, and they were playing from behind. Basically the exact game script we would have wanted from Goedert, but the results on the field, they really didn't match up with that. What I will say though, in his defense, is that it was very promising to see Richard Rodgers getting 5 targets as well. Both Rodgers and Goedert did finish the match with 4 receptions. Goedert outproducing him from a yardage perspective, but it was promising because we do know that the tight end position is heavily used in this offense. Expect better games for Goedert in the future, and right now he's coming in at 52% ownership, which means there are teams out there that can nab him off the waiver wire. The next player we have is Logan Thomas. He's coming off of a game in which he received 6 targets. 6 targets for Logan Thomas. It's right in line with his consistent volume he's received over basically the past 10 weeks. We do know that when it comes to the passing offense of the Washington football team, his role is very safe, it's very secure, which means week over week, he has an extremely high floor. I would compare his floor to a very similar player from a production standpoint, that of Hunter Henry, but Logan Thomas doesn't have the name value of Hunter Henry, so in return, he flies under the radar each week. The reason he ranks so high on the list this week is because next week he will be facing Cincinnati, one of the worst, if not the worst, defenses against defending opposing fantasy tight ends. So this is definitely a player who could likely slip inside the top 12 in our rankings next week. The next player we have is Jordan Reed, another familiar name on the waiver wire videos at the tight end position. And when it comes to Jordan Reed, we know that he would be a very solid start if he was involved in the offense while George Kittle is out. In this first week, he was back against Green Bay. We really didn't see him have much field time at all. While he was on the field, he was being out targeted by other tight ends that really were unproven. So we knew Jordan Reed's health overall was playing a factor. In this game, he received 6 targets though, converted that into 5 receptions, 62 receiving yards, proving to all of us that he is a full go, and as far as we are concerned, he is healthy. While he's healthy and George Kittle is not, Jordan Reed is going to be in top 12 consideration at the tight end position each and every week depending on matchup. Just keep in mind he is heading into a week 11 bye, so monitor the health of the other pieces around him because his volume may increase or decrease because of that. The final tight end we have is Dalton Schultz, and while yes, this may be a streamer, right now we're seeing a lot of teams hoard tight ends, and with Dalton Schultz being on a bye this past week, if you double check your waiver wire, he may be available for your teams out there that are desperate to fill that position. His upcoming matchup this week, it is against Minnesota. It's on the road, so Minnesota presumably being home favorites does promote a more run heavy game script, but Dalton Schultz has proven to be a major contributor in this passing offense, and for any tight end to be said that about them, that's a player that all of us would be considering starting if the matchup promotes it. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.